Canadian War Museum Oral History Program. Interview with Master Corporal retired Richard Delve. Am I pronouncing that right?
Yes.
Perfect. I am in Ottawa. He is in Kingston, if I'm not mistaken. On the 29th of March, 2021, interview begins. Good morning. Can I ask you to first say and spell your name, please?
Okay, my name is Richard Delve, Richard Delve.
Thank you so much. And I've sent you the legal release that you've reviewed.
Yes. Yep.
Fantastic.
No problem.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. So what we're going to talk about today is your deployment to the Gulf in 1990-91 as part of the Gulf War. But before we get into that, why don't you tell me a little bit about yourself? Where you grew up? Did you have any military history in your family? What prompted you to join the Canadian Armed Forces?
I was born in Hamilton, Ontario. And then when I was 5, we moved to a little town called Clinton, Ontario, just an hour north of London in southwestern Ontario, and grew up there till I finished high school and went away to college and university. I wasn't really interested in the military when I was growing up. I was more my what would you call it? My hobby when I was growing up was geology, and I loved looking at rocks and stuff like that. And I started at McMaster in the geological engineering thing. That lasted 6 months because I didn't like university style life, and I always had an interest in cooking. And then when I was looking at something to do after dropping out of university, I went, "Oh, I've always liked cooking," so I was looking at some programs and decided on Humber College in Toronto, and ended up doing a 2-year chef's program there. I graduated from there, and I was working at a Italian restaurant in Stratford, Ontario, for a while, and I had some time off, and I was going to visit a friend in London. And as I was driving down London to see my friend, I passed the recruiting center, and I went, "Oh, you know what? I've thought about that every once in a while." And I stopped in the next day on my way back, and within a month and a half, I was off to Cornwallis to start my military training.
Oh wow! So just like that.
Yeah, it was just something I did on a whim, and I'd been interested in it. And we did like career days in high school and stuff like that. I was always like, we had the Canadian Forces recruiters and that. I always enjoyed, like I was always an outdoor person, and my dad started me into hunting and stuff like that, and target shooting, but I'd never really done anything military wise. My great uncle was a chaplain in the war, Reverend Samuel Delve, and he came ashore at the very end of the day on D-Day once they had the beachheads were safe and stuff like that. He came ashore, and that's on my father's side. On my mother's side, my grandfather, her father, he was a bomber navigator instructor, and spent time in England instructing the navigators on the bombers that were going over. I don't think he saw much in the way of combat himself, but he was an instructor, and he never really talked about his service. It wasn't until I joined that he actually took any interest in getting his medals, and had to apply through Veterans Affairs to get his medals. I guess me doing that and continuing that kind of tradition, I guess, kind of set him off. And he was always very, I honestly didn't know until I joined the military that he was in there. That's the only time he started talking to me about it. And that was, I have his whole mess set and stuff like that from when he was in England doing the training. So other than that, like, neither of my parents, nobody else really in my family was ever in the military. It was just my great uncle and my grandfather. So
that's very interesting, because it would have been, you enlisted in 1986, I think you said, and so that would have been 40 plus years after the end of the war. And for that kind of to spark that interest, that's very interesting.
Yeah,
in him.
like I say, it was just he never really cared about his medals or anything until I joined, and then he applied to get his medals. And my aunt and my mother, after his funeral, I talked to a bunch of his friends at the funeral who had also been in the war and stuff like that, and they were said he never really talked about it to anybody. He never really considered it until, and they didn't know who I was, but he had talked about me when I joined, and it was interesting to talk to them because they related some stories to me about him, and ultimately, my grandmother and that they said, well, you can have his medals, just to pass down through the family once he passed away. So that's interest. That was I don't know. It was an interesting situation. I mean, it was sad to lose him, but
Yeah.
I learned so much through his friends and reading some of his stuff that he had that we found when we were cleaning out his desk and everything else like that. That was very interesting. That, like I say, never talked about it until I joined. So,
if you don't mind me asking, do you remember what your grandfather did after he returned home from the war? Like, what was his post-war life and career?
He was the manager for Jordan Wines in Jordan, Ontario, just south of Hamilton.
Huh.
And then it was just shortly after I was born. Was it shortly after, or shortly before I was born? I can never remember. Though, so he was offered the position to go out and be the head of Jordan Wines out in BC when they opened up their winery out there. So leaving my mother and my aunt went with them, who was younger than my mother. My mother stayed, and so they went out to BC and eventually settled in Burnaby. But he ran the Jordan Wine distillery or winery out there until he retired. So he was very, I don't know, living through the war and that. They were, my grandmother and grandfather, very nice people, but very, very frugal. And it was quite interesting to go out and visit them when I was younger, because I never got to see them that much because they were in BC and I was in Ontario. But whenever I did, my grandfather was always a very reserved individual. But there was what would it be, like an impish humor about him when he was doing stuff. And then when I finally took my children out to meet him, back in, oh man, was it 2007 or 2006? After I got out, it was he was, I don't know, he just loved the little kids and stuff like that, and he was fooling around with my son, which is a side of him I never saw. So it was very nice to see that before he passed away. But yeah, he managed the Jordan Wines winery out there in BC from, oh geez, what that's like, I was born in 1963, so it was just around that time until he retired. And that's he like I say, he spoke nothing about the war until after I joined. So I didn't really know growing up anything about him. So,
and just so make sure we have it on the record, what was his name?
His name was Jack William Downing, and everybody called him John.
Huh. So I take it his response was generally positive then, that you had signed up. Your family generally was supportive of you signing up?
Oh yeah, I had no reservations from anybody about what I'd signed. Like my mother, I don't know what she saw in me, but she was like, when I signed up and told her that I joined the military, she was like, well, you should have done that years ago. So and I'm like, well, why would you say that? Because I had no interest in it. But she obviously knew something that I didn't. So she was very happy. My dad, of course, was very happy. He actually, when I graduated Cornwallis, he drove down to Nova Scotia to attend the graduation with me. But yeah, there was no negative thoughts or anything expressed to me from any of my family.
Right. So going from like back of house to barracks, it wasn't a big, was it a big change for you?
Oh, the first 2 days I was scared shitless in Cornwallis. we had a warrant officer from Newfoundland, Warrant Officer Penny. I don't think he stood 5 feet high if he was an inch. But man, one of the toughest people I ever knew. And it was just I guess that initial start in Cornwallis, where you're doing this initial briefing. It was a Sunday afternoon once we got there, and we were sitting in this classroom area, and he was talking, and he had this paste stick that he kept slamming down on the desk, and I think we were all scared shitless of him. But he was a very interesting man once you actually got to talk to him. So, but like I say, it was just like the first 2 days. It's like the first couple hours I was there is like, what have I gotten myself into? Because just a total shift from being in civilian world to being in the military, and then after a couple of days, everything settled down. It was just like, all right, well, this is okay. And as long as you, I realized after, and I was probably the oldest one. I didn't join till I was 22. So I was the oldest one there. Everybody else was like 18, 19, so I'd actually been to college and lived on my own and done all that stuff, whereas these kids hadn't. I call them kids, I was too. But I realized, I had a little bit of life experience over them. And I realized after about a week, it's like, all right, it's kind of like if you play the game, they'll leave you alone. And, once you kind of get into that mindset and you realize that it's a game and they're doing this for a reason, and you can play along with the game, and everything seemed to run, there's hard, they're doing stuff to you, and, doing push-ups till your arms can't do anything else anymore, and running it till you're going to throw up on the side of the road. But, if like I say, if you follow along what they're doing it for a reason. And, it wasn't that bad. But like I say, the initial shock, the first couple hours I was there, was like, what the hell have I gotten myself into?
So post-graduation, you were, I guess your trade was as a cook. So you kind of moved with that experience into the armed forces and were able to apply that experience post basic. What was that like in terms of getting into the trade as a CAF cook? What in terms of the difference between civilian and in the military?
Well, when we got into Borden to the cook school, it was interesting because most people that join as a cook have no prior experience. Yeah, I mean, yeah, they probably cooked at home or something like that, but they have no real experience or knowledge of anything, large quantity. So walking in there, they have to start everybody off as, they know nothing. So, after going through college for 2 years and doing what I did, and then working out on City Street for a while, going in there, I was like, like, this is like, you can do this in your sleep. And I had to, there was another gentleman on my course that came from Cornwallis with me. He was in my squad and everything in Cornwallis. Steve, I can't remember his last name, but he had his papers already. He had his cook's papers, whereas I didn't. I'd just done the college. But they realized that, we kind of knew everything that was going on, and we'd already done all this stuff. So while we still stayed with and did our training with our class, after, I think it was after like a month and a half, I had to provide them with my transcripts, and he had to provide them with his paperwork, to prove what we'd done. I had to go back to the college and get them to fax up transcripts for me and stuff like that. Then what they did is the rest of our course was still in training, and we were accelerated through. So I graduated probably, Oh, I graduated in May. Steve and I, whereas the rest of the course it was like a 4-month course at that time, I think. I honestly don't know how long it was because we were accelerated through. So, and they didn't know what to do with us for the summer because our course wasn't set to graduate until August. So I was sent out to, well, originally it was Chilliwack for the summer and spent 2 days in Chilliwack, and then got sent to Aldergrove, which was the Canadian Forces Naval Radio Station on the West Coast, for the summer, to augment the cooks there, because one cook was taking an entire month off. So I was there to help him, to help them and replace him for the month. But they left me out there for 3 months, which was interesting to cook at a small station like that. And I don't know where Steve went after that, but the rest of our course didn't graduate till August. And then when our graduation dates were supposed to happen, and then I got transferred out to Esquimalt in Victoria to the Navy out there. So I spent a summer in Aldergrove, which was great because, it was less than an hour into Vancouver, which is where my grandparents were, that my grandfather had, so I actually got to visit them quite a bit on my days off, even though I had no transportation. Usually I could hitch a ride with somebody who was going into Vancouver or something and whatnot. But that was kind of great because it was instead of being thrown to the wolves type of thing, like into a full service kitchen and, feeding hundreds and hundreds of people, I was in a small station and we were feeding, basically the live-ins for breakfast, which was, maybe 20, 30 people. You'd have 50 or 60 for lunch because of all the people that were there and had lunch. And then, another 20 or so for supper. So it was really nice because it was a gradual, instead of, going from the cooking school right to a unit, even though this was, the military, but it was kind of like a small kitchen. It was a gradual, what's the word I'm looking for? Just a gradual introduction to what was going on.
A smooth transition into the full service, I suppose.
Yeah, so it was kind of nice, and I met some nice people there, and friends I still have to this day. The 2 other military cooks that were there that I worked with. So, it was really nice, and I actually learned quite a bit there about the military style of cooking before going to an actual base. So
what could you tell me about the military style of cooking? Like, what were some of the takeaways?
The military style of cooking, I mean, because you're working in facilities like when I first got to Esquimalt, I was put in Nellie's block, which is the big base kitchen there, and you're feeding like 300, 400 people for breakfast. So you don't have time for all the little extras and niceties that go on. It's like you're doing eggs and hash browns and bacon and stuff like that. It's all large quantity cooking. You don't have time for, I mean, you're still, it's still about food quality and stuff like that. You're not scrimping on that, but you're kind of scrimping a little bit on the smaller details that you would, if you're going to a restaurant, or when I was in Aldergrove, for example, like, you're feeding 20 guys for supper, you can do little extras. When you're feeding 400 people, you don't have the people, you don't have the time to do it. And it was quite a bit different from what I had learned. And like I say, it was a nice gradual transition, but it was still a shock to the system because the first day I was there, early shift, I went in and it's like, okay, I have no idea how anything works in this. I've never been in this kitchen before. And the master corporal on shift goes, "You're with me. We're going out to do breakfast. You're on the egg grill." And I'm like, "Okay, what do I do?" He says, "Start cracking eggs and don't stop." And it just fill the grill with eggs. They opened the doors and I looked at the line of people coming in and went, "Holy shit, what am I going to do?" It was just, just keep the grill filled with eggs and feed them. And it seemed like an infinity later. And it's like, wow, that was pretty intense. But like I say, it was an eye opener. But like I say, you still, we still did our best to work with the quality food, and feed people properly, and give them high quality food and stuff. But like I say, when you get something that big, you don't get the little extras and the little attention to detail that you may otherwise have in a smaller kitchen or something like that.
Yeah, you're not sprinkling chives delicately on each egg as you're serving it up.
Yeah, I know. Doing that, you're just taking a handful and whipping it across the grill.
All right, so you were there from in Esquimalt from 86 to 89 thereabouts. And then you was your first international deployment to LAR with NATO?
Yeah, I got posted to 1st Regiment Royal Canadian Horse Artillery in Lar.
Okay. So what was that? Were you a singular posting, or were you going with a group? How'd that work?
No, that was I because I got posted to Esquimalt in September of '86, and then I was there for 2 months, September and October, and then November I got posted to the HMCS Kootenay, a ship, and I was on Kootenay till June of '89, and then I got my posting message in June of eight or I got my posting message in January of '89. I was getting posted to Germany because at that time it was like, a 3-year posting was normal. They posted everybody pretty much every 3 years. So, and it was kind of weird too that I was in Esquimalt because I had an Army uniform. We had, when I joined in '86, they were bringing in the separate elements again. So, and because cooks are tri-service, we serve all 3 elements. We were given the choice what you wanted. Well, I'd always, I picked Army just because I'd always been, an outdoorsy person and stuff like that. So when I got sent to the ship where it's all Navy trades, there was only 2 of us on the ship with an Army uniform. There was myself and the chief clerk. We were Army. There was a couple Air Force guys, which were storesmen, the supply tech storesmen on the ship, and then everybody else is Navy. So when you go to a parade, we stick out like a sore thumb. And it was interesting because I never asked to go to Esquimalt. When you were in Borden or when we were doing our trades training, they asked you for 3 choices where you wanted to go. And I picked London, which was close to home, and it was an Army. It was at that time it was the RCR were posted in London at Wolseley Barracks. I picked London, Petawawa, and Germany. All 3 basic Army bases. I got sent to. I always made a joke of this. My choices were London, Petawawa, and Germany. I got sent to Chilliwack, Aldergrove, and Esquimalt. An Army and 2 Navy bases. So it was like, all right. And then, like I say, in '89, I got my posting message to go to Germany, and it was like, oh man, this is great. I always wanted to go. It was, that I got thinking it was an adventure, and a couple guys that I knew had been to Germany from the ships and stuff like that, and because cooks are tri-service, and you run into these guys and working around, and they told me some stuff, and I'm like, okay, I was all, but yeah, it was a singular posting. I never, it's not a batch. I just flew over by myself and got into Lar, and it's like, where the hell am I? Because I, you land at the airfield in Lar, and nothing outside the base for the first couple of days because you're doing all your in clearances and stuff. You haven't got time to do anything. You're living in barracks and that, and it's just like, then it's time to start exploring. So
I was going to say, looking at your data sheet about where you'd served and when, there are fairly a number of rotations through Germany that would be pretty remarkable to be on. But you were on '89 to '92, where a lot of interesting stuff is happening in
yeah,
Germany and around the world. And so I was curious. I mean, I was curious to think, when the wall fell. That would have been, I guess, almost a year into your time there. Do you remember anything about that time from the perspective at Lahr?
Um, not a lot of details. It was a really interesting time to be there because, yeah, you're right. There was a lot going on all over the place, and it was probably, except for the base closing down and that, and at the end, it was probably one of the best times to be there. But yeah, it was a really tense time in Lahr and in Germany at that time because nobody knew what to expect. And then when the wall came down, a lot of Eastern Europeans that that had never, that had lived under, communist rule and whatnot, started to flood into, I don't know if flood's the right word, but migrate into Western Germany. And there was a lot that were coming into Lahr and stuff like that. And Lahr was always a very safe place, partly because with the Canadians there, the MPs used to patrol the Canadian PMQ areas, and there was enough of them spread out over Lahr that they basically covered the entire area of Lahr. And it was, 3 o'clock in the morning, you could see young girls and stuff walking down the streets, and no fear of anything because it was a safe place to go. It was a safe place to be. I know friends that have been over there since, and they say it's totally changed now. A lot of Europeans, Eastern Europeans have migrated in. The PMQs that we had have been turned into almost ghetto-like areas, and stuff like that. And it's not a really, the city of Lahr is still very beautiful, but a lot of areas in big cities now, you just don't want to go there. But when I was there, it was amazing. And shortly after the wall fell, I don't know if you remember, but Roger Waters from Pink Floyd did a concert in Lahr at the Brandenburg Gate where the wall was, the wall concert that they had. And at the end, they had a big wall built up. And at the end of the concert, they knocked down the wall. And a bunch of us drove up to Berlin for that concert. And it was an amazing concert to see, because you'd had all these people that had heard how evil Western society was and everything. These Eastern Europeans that had come over to see this concert and realized, hey, rock and roll is pretty good, and the emotion and the vibe at the concert was just amazing. It was a really amazing concert, probably one of the best I've ever been to. It was just an amazing time. And then we did we were only up there for the concert, and then we had to drive back because we didn't really get a whole lot of time off at that point in time. But a little while later, we were on exercise. And usually when you're on an exercise, when we're doing training, what they will do is they will take like a night or a day and give you like a day off type of thing. So they basically bussed us into Berlin for a day or part of a day, so we could, go around and be tourists. And, it's just kind of like, middle of a, month and a half long exercise. They'll give you like a day somewhere, just, regroup, recharge your batteries, have fun and stuff like that. They actually bussed us in to Berlin, so we were able to see, and I have pictures of it somewhere in my photo albums, of the Brandenburg Gate, us standing at the Brandenburg Gate. And if you look, standing at the gate, and you look to West Berlin, there's a park there, and there's trees, and it's beautiful, and birds are chirping and whatnot. You turn around and you look into East Berlin, it's all gray roads, gray sidewalks, gray buildings, gray, just the contrast between the two of them. And then, talking to some of the people that were there, you see people going back and forth, and, you have your Canadian flag on and everything else like that. People talk to you because they love the Canadians. And you get talking to people and people that used to live in East Berlin that are now allowed in West Berlin, and what their thoughts and how they enjoy it so much and everything else like that. It was an amazing thing to see. So it like I say, there was a lot of tension when it was going on because nobody really knew what was happening. But once the wall came down and they realized that there wasn't a whole lot going on, it actually was a pretty decent time.
You mentioned an exercise. So, I mean, NATO, there's lots of exercises that take place throughout the year. What's it like? So when you go out on exercise, you're, of course, are doing the same job, but in different facilities. How did that work in terms of cooking on exercise?
Well, cooking on it depends on where we go.
Okay.
Some places they have places like Grafenwehr or Grafenwar, or however you pronounce it, was a training base. So they have buildings where you can take all your kitchen equipment and ground mount it inside a building and work from there. Other places, when you're out in what we used to say out on the economy, you're out in Fallex was a big one every year. It's called we called it Fallex. It was also called Reforger, which is short form for Return of Forces to Germany. So you'd have everybody involved in it: the Americans, the Brits, the French, the Germans, friggin' everyone was there. And it usually was the Americans against everybody else. And you're moving around a lot and you're doing stuff, and you're like, times we'd be camped and we'd have our kitchen truck and trailer in somebody's backyard. Like one of the exercises we were on, in fact, the first Fallex I was on, about 2 weeks into it, we were in this area, and I have no idea where we were in Germany. I was still getting used to it at that point, but we were in this backyard, and we were working on Zulu time or Greenwich Mean Time. So everything in the exercise was conducted. So we were a couple hours off of that. So getting up at 5 a.m. type of thing to start breakfast was actually 7 o'clock in the morning to the Germans, because everything was on certain timings. So we're in the back of our kitchen truck, because we had to sleep in our truck on exercise in Germany. We had beds set up in there and everything. And we get this knock on the back door, and we're like, it's not military, because they're not going to knock politely. Like, they're going to open the door and stick their head in and start yelling at us. So we got up, opened the door. Well, we were parked in this gentleman's backyard. It was like a, I don't know, a fairly large yard. It was an orchard and stuff like that in it. Well, it was this gentleman's wife bringing us breakfast. And, it had just typical German breakfast. It had some cheeses, had some meats and buns and, and whatnot. And we're like, well, thank you very much and whatnot. We found out that, he liked, every German likes to brew their own beer, right? There's little, what we call microbreweries, but in Germany, every little town and hamlet and crossroads had their own little brewery. So he was brewing beer. So, we were, his wife brought breakfast to him. We gave him a couple bags of sugar for, fermenting the beer for the yeast and stuff like that and whatnot. And we'd be cooking during the day, and the guy's son would be out there looking, because, Canadians and, army stuff and whatnot. And I think we traded him. I think we gave him like one of our IMPs, like our it's called individual meal packs, like the hard rations. We gave him one of those. He was thrilled with that. But if you're doing like Fallex and stuff like that, when you're out in the countryside and doing stuff, it's nice to interact with the locals, because once you get away from the big cities, like, I guess it's like any city, even in Canada with the military, and people become used to the military being there, and it's not a big thing. But you get out into the small communities out in Germany and stuff like that, where the Canadians during the war were highly respected, and the old people still remember that. They love Canadians, and you could go and you talk to them, and it's fantastic. talking to them, hearing their stories, and you know, getting to know them and stuff like that. Whereas some of the other exercises we did, like we go to Grafenveer or Hohensfels, or I'm trying to think of the place we used to go up north a lot. It was a British base where it was just like a big training area, and then we had buildings, and you know, we cooked off a kitchen trailer mostly, but everything on the kitchen trailer could be taken off and ground mounted. So when we were in a base like that, we had buildings, we'd ground mount everything and cook from there, and then send out hay boxes, or have guys come in and eat. Whereas out in the field, you just set up and then the guys will wander through and do stuff. So very different from cooking on a base. Not so different from cooking on a ship, because you have to, you know, get a small amount of space, a small amount, you know, you only have so much. So probably being on ship was good training for being out in the field. Although I will say on ship it's a little bit better because you can have a hot shower every day, whereas in the field, not so much.
Fair enough. Well, so moving on a little bit to the period of primary concern for the interview, which is the Gulf War. In August of 1990, Saddam and Iraq, of course, make the decision to invade Kuwait in August, early August. You were still in Germany at that point. How did you find yourself going to the Middle East?
It's kind of a funny story, actually, because we heard about what was going on, because it was all over the base when it happened. And I was on days off at the time, because when you're on base, you don't need a whole bunch of cooks at your you know, the RCHA lines at the South Mark. So there was a couple cooks working there. One of them was in the stand easies for the warrant officer and sergeants. One was in the officer stand easy. One was in the men's stand easy. And you know, your sergeants are there, and you have the chief cook doing their paperwork and stuff like that. But the rest of the cooks are not really needed, so they're sent to base, because all the guys living in barracks and stuff like that, it's, you know, more people are eating on base. So we're working in the base kitchen, and I happened to be on days off when it happened, and I went out to the regiment, and I was in the chief cook's office, and I said, look, I said, I heard this was going on, and I said, I don't know a whole lot about it. There's not a lot on the news, but if anything does go on, I would like to volunteer to go to Iraq or Kuwait or whatever. And he said, okay, I'll keep that in mind. Didn't hear anything more of it, didn't think anything of it. I'd heard that they were sending some ships. It's like, okay, well, I'm not in the Navy, I ain't going. And we were going up for Fall X. And on Fall X, because it's held, like, LAR was in southern Germany, and Fall X is normally held central or northern Germany. So everything, we can't take track vehicles on the roadways there. So everything's moved by train, and you have to feed every vehicle has 2 people go with it. You have a driver and a crew commander. All these vehicles, tracked vehicles, get loaded on trains, and it's a train move. It can take 2 to 3 days to move this stuff, because the priorities on the German rail system were actually lower than a garbage train. So, but what they do is they send cooks, and we have anything, like we ground mount a grill, we got a burner, and we're basically cooking fast fry stuff for like bacon and eggs for breakfast, like pork chops or chicken breasts, or anything we can grill for the meals for the guys. So it's you know, 2 or 3 days of cooking on a train or whatever. So there was myself and the other cook that I was with on the kitchen trailer, Kent Darby. We were on the train, and we pull into a base, and I forget which base it was. And of course, you know, it's just after lunchtime, so we cooked lunch and we cleaned up and we got all our stuff ready, and we're on this car. It's kind of like a mail car. It's empty except for what we put in there. So we're sitting there, we had the doors open, and we're waiting we're pulling all our stuff off from the train car onto the platform. And my battery commander and my battery sergeant major walk up to the car, And they look at me and they said, Corporal Delve. And I went, yes, sir. He says, pack your shit, get over to the chief cook, talk to him. You're getting in a Jeep and you're going back to LAR. And in the back of my mind, I'm terrified. I'm thinking, what have I done? Who have I pissed off? I'm going to jail. and I said, sir, if you don't mind me asking, what's this all about? What's going on? He says, son, he says, you're going to Saudi Arabia. You're going to war. And I went, pardon me? He says, Iraq invaded Kuwait. He says, we have people going to Saudi Arabia. He says, you're one of them. He says, get your stuff up. He says, the Jeep leaves in 45 minutes. And I'm like, okay. So I grabbed my stuff. Said goodbye to the guys that were there, went over, saw the chief cook, and he told me what was going on. I'm like, all right. And then they had a driver drive me back to LAR, which was probably a 4 or 5 hour drive down the Autobahn. So I didn't get there till, actually probably longer than that. I didn't get there till almost midnight. And of course, because I was on Fallex, they just dropped us off at the South Marg lines. Well, I was supposed to be on Fallex. I had a little apartment on the Economy then. And so I had to get my car, put all my stuff in it. I had to report the next morning at, 7 o'clock for whatever training was going on. So I drove back to this little apartment I had, which was this basement apartment out in the Economy. And I lived in this, it was an older lady that had a house, and I was living in this apartment in her basement. She was 80 some odd years old. Her husband and her husband and two of her sons were killed in the Second World War. Her other son was captured by the Canadians. She liked Canadians. He was captured by the Canadians, and he was treated very well, which is probably why she had renting out to Canadians. So she didn't speak much English, and I didn't speak much German, just a little bit here and there. And so I pull in at midnight, and of course she thinks I'm gone for like 4 or 5 weeks because I'm on exercise. I told her I was going on exercise. So she comes down and knocks on my door after I get home and asks me what's going on, understandably. And I told her, I said, in my broken German that I was trying to get across to her, that I was going to war. And she's like, what? And she was very, very shocked what was going on. And then I tried to explain to her about Iraq and stuff like that, and she understood. So and then from there it was what, this was the middle of September, so 4 or 5 weeks of training that we were doing. They just went through all the you do your personal weapons test again, you go out in the firing range, you do your shooting, and then all sorts of training, do the gas hut again, which is one of the big threats that they were preparing for. All the stuff that we had to do, the inoculations and everything else that we had and whatnot. And then, it was just kind of basically sitting around until they decided what date we were going out. So.
And roughly, do you remember roughly how big the group was that was gearing up to go?
From LAR, I was on the first, well, there was advanced party before us, but I was basically on the first chalk that was going over with the people that were going. There's probably 40 people on our plane, plus an MLVW and a trailer and a pallet of supplies. And then there was Hercs flying in all the time after that. We left October 5th from LAR, and I got in October 6th into Qatar. So a 16-hour flight. LAR to Akatir, Cyprus. We refueled in Cyprus at I think it was a British base.
Yeah, it's a British base there.
Weren't allowed off the plane. And then another 8 hours into Qatar, because at that time we weren't allowed to fly over Saudi Arabia or anything. So we had to go south and then hook back up. So 16 hours on a Herc, and we landed like 2 o'clock in the morning, I think it was. So it was an interesting flight.
What was your first impressions of your base there in Qatar?
Well, we weren't in a base right off the bat because they hadn't found a place for us to go to yet. They were working on it, so we got off the plane at the airport, and we basically had to sit around with all our kit for a few hours. And it was just like getting off the Herc, where you're flying so high, it's cool, kind of cool up in the Herc. And you land, the plane's still kind of cold. They open that door and you're just walking into a wall of heat. And there's a guy standing at the door in the ground. And as you walk down, he's giving you a bottle of water, says, start drinking because you're going to need it. And we sat around for, I don't know, it had to be about 3 or 4 hours or so. And we didn't really know what to expect, because we didn't know what was going on. They hadn't had a place for us yet. So we were staying in the hotel. I can't remember the name of the hotel, but we stayed in a hotel in downtown Doha for, I think it was 2 days that we stayed there. And then they finally found a camp for us. And then it was another 4 or 5 days at the camp, kind of cleaning it up and getting it ready for human habitation, but we still stayed in the rooms anyway. So we had 4 guys to a room, bunk beds. And the kitchen was just, it was what they call it, not a forced labor camp, but they go to like places like Pakistan and India and at that time, probably Afghanistan and Azerbaijan and places like that. And they get these workers and they sign contracts for 2, 3, 4 years. They come to these camps, they feed them, they house them. And then, they're there for like a period of time as laborers for these companies. And then all the money gets sent back home to their families. So this is one of these camps we moved into. So hygiene wasn't big on the list. When we got there, the kitchen they had was just, well, that's it. No self-respecting rat or cockroach would live in it. It was really bad. It took us like literally 4 days to clean it, just to get it, and guys working on, they had ovens and a couple sinks and some stoves and stuff like that. But we had brought equipment with us. We brought a kitchen trailer with us, so we had that ground mount equipment as well. So we set up a tent, a section of modular tent out back that we set our ground mount in, and we had guys working we had the techs in to fix the stoves and the fridges and stuff like that. They brought in some sea containers for us to store our rations, and a freezer sea container and a fridge sea container for the rations and stuff like that. But it was the conditions were, like I said, it was just like we were washing this, like we started washing the rooms and whatnot, and it's just like, these guys that were in there, and nothing against them, they did what they have to do for their families and whatnot, but like the cigarette smoke was just thick on the roof, like the ceilings and the walls, and it's just washing it off. Oh, and then in the kitchen, like I don't think they'd ever cleaned the stoves and the ovens while they were there, so we had to clean all that stuff. Like I said, it literally took us 4 days to get this place. So it was, okay to cook in, but a lot of work went into it. And then, you're working all this time and doing all that stuff and putting in. So, we were eating like the MREs, the IMPs and that hard rations for, the first few days, which, they're not bad, but, I can understand why guys don't like them after 4 or 5 days.
I guess it gets old quick. So you were able to set up and do some of the initial cookery with your existing stuff you brought over until you had the rest of the kitchen up to code.
Well, until we got that, we didn't really cook for like 3 days, really. So we were on rations for 3 days when we were setting up the camp. Everybody was, and it was just like you say, it was just, but it like the Canadian military motto is, I still think we're one of the only militaries in the world that feeds fresh rations to their guys on exercise. You know, I know the Americans on exercise a lot. They use what they call T rations, which are big trays of stuff that they just throw in an oven, reheat, like trays of pork chops or chicken breasts or stuff like that. The Canadian Army has always been, and the military, even on ships and stuff like that, everywhere, has always been big on feeding fresh rations to the people in the field. So you know, that's what we work off of, the, you know, with the food service industry is, you know, our motto, servitum nulli secundus, which service second to none. You know, we get fresh rations to the guys as quickly and effectively as possible. So, you know, as soon as we can, we started cooking in the kitchen. I think it was like after 3 days of working, we were finally able to do that. So, and
Did
it's a big morale boost. It really is.
did you bring did you bring a lot of the fresh supplies with you in like a sea container, or was that something that was procured locally? Do you remember?
When we first got there, we brought stuff in because we didn't know what was going on for the local food supply. So we did bring a lot of stuff in ourselves. Of course, going into a predominantly Muslim country, we couldn't bring any pork products in with us, like no pork and beans, no pork chops, anything else like that. As it turned out, we could have brought in whole pigs with us. They didn't really care.
Right.
You know, and we did start getting that stuff towards the end. We get stuff flown in from Lahr and Germany and stuff like that. We did try and buy stuff locally. And some of the food was like canned goods, or, you know, not, you can, they're, you know, they're pretty much safe wherever you go. Fresh rations, we tried to buy some locally, and I think we had some issues with that because we had what we thought was going to be beef one night, and I think it was horse meat. And a lot of guys got sick over that, like weren't feeling well, like not throwing up sick, but weren't feeling well for the longest time. And I think that they're talking to the doctors about it because a lot of the injections we were given, like a lot of the serums we use, are like based on horse serum. So there was an interaction, I think, between that. But after that, we started getting all our meats flown in from, it was either Germany, because we had flights coming in all the time, or from the American bases, because that's more of the foods we were accustomed to. Like I say, we did come in with some stuff on, like when we first came in. We brought a lot of stuff with us, and because we didn't know what was going on, a lot of canned stuff and everything else like that. One of the big things that the Americans had for their rations out in the field was canned bacon, 100-ounce can, and the bacon's put on little strips of, it's real bacon, but it's on like parchment paper, and then it's rolled up into a round, and it fits in a 100-ounce can. And so you open up the top of the can, you pull the bacon out, you flatten it out, and put it on a tray, heat it up. It's good to go, and it's actually really good bacon. But so we brought a lot of that with us, because you ever been out in a Canadian military exercise breakfast, you got to have bacon. The guys just, you know, it's kind of an army thing.
And so who were you serving though? Like who was how many roughly were you serving every day, and who were you serving when you were in Qatar?
We were serving our troops. So we had a little, like, basically our guys, what we were there to support was the Air Force. So we had the fighter squadrons that were there. So it was a combination of I forget the names now. Is it 429, 409, 435 fighter squadrons from Canada? It was a mishmash of pilots and the guys from Germany, the fighter squadrons from Baden in Germany, plus of course all their ground crew and everything. So we had all the weapons techs and the avionics techs and everything else like that. So that's who we were feeding. Of course, we had a small military police detachment there. We had a small medical detachment. We had our own little headquarters staff and whatnot. So originally we were on this camp outside of Qatar. So we were probably feeding, oh man, I'd say 200 people. And then partway through, because the guys were going out. We were away from the airport, so there's only one big airport in Doha, like in the whole country, really. So all the fighters were at the airport in Doha, and we were outside of town. So the guys had to be bussed back and forth. And eventually, I think it was just before December, because we were called Canada Dry 1, or Camp Canada Dry. And then they split us into two groups. So they had Canada Dry 2. They set up a small, like a small little camp there at the airport for the guys that were, I guess, on duty. And we had cooks there that were cooking for those guys. And then we had all the guys that were back where we were at the main camp. So we split it into two. So after a while, like we had probably, 125 guys there. Plus we had our camp security as well, right? So for the first 3 months, it was November Company from 1RCR from Baden, and they were camp security. And then just before Christmas, was it just before Christmas or just after? They switched, and it was the Van Duys that came in and provided camp security. So we had this, we had all the Air Force guys and their ground support and everything else to do with them, plus our small medical detachment and military police detachment, our security, camp security, and a small headquarters detachment. So, like I say, we were feeding about 200 at the beginning, and then once they split it up, I think they were feeding like 100 or so down at the, down at the camp at the airport, and we were feeding about 100 or so up where we were.
So did you split your time between the two places, or are you mainly at CD1?
No, they had cooks that were down there and pretty much stayed down there. So okay. my buddy that I flew over with, he was down in CD2 for most of his time. Like, well, the camp was set up down there. I stayed at Canada Dry 1. So I had a day off at one point, and I went down there just to see it, but I didn't cook down there.
So you were mostly away from the flight line and all of that noise and business, but
oh, you still got the noise because they took off slightly over top of us.
Oh, okay.
So we got that, like, you knew when the planes were taking off. And I stayed for, because the like a normal tour for stuff like that, like, when you go on like a UN tour, a NATO tour, or something like that, is 6 months. So, but they didn't know what to expect with us. So everything, it was a 3-month setup. So we were only supposed to be there for 3 months. And then I didn't have anything really going on in Germany, much. So it's like, I'll stay for the second. So, and my buddy Blair did the same thing. He was there longer than me. He was there right till the end. Right till they packed up everything and put the brooms in the boxes and flew them out. But I left at the beginning of March, which was almost near the end of the tour. I just like, okay, I'd been there for 5.5 months. I'm done. I'm like, send me home, send me back. Whereas he stayed and whatnot. But yeah, so they cycled people through after 3 months, and then there was they had support come over from Canada after that. I missed a lot of those guys because they were there after that. They were on like kind of like the third rotation until everything packed up. But yeah, the planes took off over top of us, and you could tell what planes they were, but you got so used to the sound. You could tell the planes by the sound of the engine, whether it was the Canadian F-18s, the American F-16s, or the French or Qatari Mirage fighters. So you didn't even have to look, and you hear them going off. It's like, oh, there's 2 F-18s going, or oh, there's a couple Mirages taking off. But yeah, we were away from the flight line in the camp, but you still heard you knew when the planes were leaving.
So when you were there, you were mainly doing the work of your trade, but were you also doing things like sentry duty or anything like that, like post eating hours?
No, we were there to cook. We were there to do our job. That's, like I said, that's what we had the camp security force there for. Why they brought in the Van Duys and the RCRs. The only thing that we did do outside of our trade, and I don't know if you really call it outside our trade or not, but because of the threat of of biological and chemical agents from Iraq, because Saddam was very threatening with that stuff. When you're on a ship, I'm going back to my first 3 years, when you're on a ship, you do other stuff on the ship. You don't just cook. You're also, because there's different, when action stations happen on a ship, there's other things going on. The supply section, which is where the cooks fall in on the ship, they're in charge of doing casualty clearing and what they call NBCD, nuclear, biological, chemical defense and stuff like that. So I would say 95% of the cooks we had in Qatar had shipboard experience. So because of the threat of that, we had to have an NBCD team in case anything happened. So, and because the cooks were trained in this is what we did on ship, and everybody had sea experience. We were actually the nuclear, or the what we call nuclear, biological, chemical decontamination team. So we had, that was kind of like our secondary duty. We didn't really do anything until the night the war started. Like, when in that, that cold day in February, when the Americans, 2 o'clock in the morning, they started blowing the crap out of Iraq and everything else like that. When they started with the missiles and the bombers and everything else. So we got woken up, of course, 2 o'clock in the morning, the whole war starts, everything was going on. That's when Desert Storm started. And so we had to deploy to an area outside of Doha. And there was 4 spots, depending on which way the prevailing winds were coming. Because if Saddam did launch an attack, then we had to be ready to decontaminate everything from nerve agents to biological agents and everything else. So we had to set up a decontamination facility. So that was kind of like that was our secondary duty while we were over there. And that's the only thing we did. And like I say, the only time we had to do that was the night the war started.
So did you actually have to go out and set up a site that was then your kind of would be your like dispersal point in the event that there was a big attack?
Yes, yep, we did. We 2 o'clock in the morning, we got up, and it's like our warrant officer, our KO, the chief cook, is like, all right. He says, we got up, we assembled in the kitchen. It's like, okay, we got to get everything ready. The truck was already set up. We had 2 trucks that we took with all the tentage and all the decontamination stuff and everything else that was already prepared and they're ready to go. He detailed me. I had to go to supply to pick up ammunition because we didn't carry ammunition in our rifles at the time while we were there, but we had to be ready and so I had to go over and pick that up. And then we got in the trucks and we drove out to an area. I forget where it was, but it was one of our points outside of Doha. And we had our radiation detectors with us. We had our chemical detection kits and all that stuff. And we spread out, we set up the tentage. We spread out around the area and started with the chemical detectors and stuff like that. And we were there till, well, it was after the sun came up. And once they realized that, the Americans and the coalition forces had pretty much, stopped him from doing anything, it's like nothing's coming our way. So then we packed up and went back into camp and just carried on from there.
Did you have to wear a lot of like NBC gear just kind of while you're on the job? So you're kind of half in, half out sort of thing?
Well, we only had to wear the NBCD gear when they had alerts going on, like before before the war started, like when Saddam was still launching missiles here and there and stuff. Every time a missile went up, for the first little while, they didn't know where it was going. So they'd call an alert. We had to get in our gear and stuff like that. We had a point or a muster point where we had to go to and everything else like that. And then they realized, okay, the missile's not coming anywhere near us, back to work and away we go. We had to have that with us everywhere we went. In the evenings, if we decided to go downtown to the local markets and the souks and stuff like that, we had to carry our NBCD gear with us. So we had a backpack with our bunny suit and our boots and gloves in it. And then we had our gas mask carrier with the gas mask and the atropine needles and the decontamination stuff and everything. So if we had to go somewhere, that's what we had to carry with us. Like I say, never had to use it for real, but we had to get into it an awful lot. And
I was just curious if, like, in combination with the kind of heat of the desert, were you also grilling while wearing the full suit, that sort of thing? But I'm assuming if you were getting to that point, you wouldn't be serving up lunches.
yeah, no, I remember one time I think we did it, and that was it. That was the only time we did it. We're sitting there, and that was only for probably 15-20 minutes or something like that. But the rest of the time, like when stuff like that was going on, we were at our muster points and everything else like that, and we weren't there. But I remember we did have to do it once, and I forget the reason why. But yeah, you're sitting there with our gas masks on the top of our head. We weren't wearing them per se. They're on the top of our heads. We had our bunny suits on, but like kind of we're at the bottoms, but the tops tied around our waist. So, and then our boots on and stuff like that. And the gloves were tucked in on your belt and stuff like that. So you get to them quick. And yeah, it was some hot.
So, do you remember the night of the war with the when things kind of kicked off? That would have been, I guess, in mid-January thereabouts. That was, I guess, a very different tempo of operations. You would have been hearing a lot more aircraft coming and going after that point.
Yeah, our aircraft were up they're coming and going all the time because they were basically doing reconnaissance and enforcement and stuff with the no-fly zone and stuff like that. And then the night the war started, they turned into bomber escorts for the bombers that were going in, and stuff like that. So yeah, there was a greater tempo after that. But it really didn't, other than like, the night it started and the first couple of days after that, it really, it was kind of the same. It was just, we were there, we knew what was going on, and there's all the stuff that goes along with that, but it wasn't really that much different from the beginning, other than just before I left, they did launch a missile and it hit outside of Doha, and we had to go out and basically make sure there was no chemical or anything like that with it, no chemical or biological stuff. So we, there was guys that went out and did that, just to make sure. And I actually have a piece of shrapnel from it. Once everything was cleared and whatnot, I had a buddy of mine picked up a piece for me and gave it to me and whatnot. But
from like a Scud launch that impacted near Doha. Oh,
yeah,
interesting.
We were number, I'm trying to think. Saddam had a list from what we were told. This is what we got in our daily briefings and stuff like that. We were like number 7 on the list of places where, if Scuds were going out, that's where they'd come. Thankfully, that was the only one. But we were where we were in Qatar, it was kind of like at the extreme limits of the range. So accuracy probably wasn't a big thing, which is probably good, but
yeah, I should think so. So when you eventually mentioned that you decided to head home about 5.5 months into it, so this would have been, I guess, post ceasefire. You knew at that point things were wrapping up.
Yeah, it's just like I was just I don't know. It just I don't remember the real reasons. All I remember is like it's time for me to go.
Okay.
I just, in the back of my mind, it's like, okay, it's time for me to get out of here.
Okay.
And I went and I talked to my warrant officer and I said, you know what, I've been here since October and it's time for me to go home. And he's like, okay. He says, well, we'll get it sorted out. I'll let you know what's going on. And
yeah.
then
was it an easier flight out than the flight in?
It was shorter because we were allowed to fly through Saudi airspace then, so it was a little bit shorter, but still, any ride in a Hurricane is, not a comfortable experience.
Right. So you get, and then you resume kind of life in LAR in 91 for a little while, and then you're back out to Unperfor. Is that right?
Yeah, yeah. I got back to LAR, and then because of we didn't really have any days off. Well, we had a few days off here and there while we were in LAR, or in Qatar, but because of that, so we had, and we were given no leave beforehand before we left. So you normally got like 5 embarkation days and 5 disembarkation days, and then we got like 1 day a week for every date for every week we were over there and stuff like that. And then they maxed us out at 35 days because myself and my buddy Blair could have got a lot more than that because we'd been there for longer.
Right.
But so I was off for like over a month of leave. So I spent the first week in Germany just hanging out and getting back to normal and whatnot. And then I flew back to Canada for 3 weeks and then back to Germany, and then started back at the regiment and at the base and doing stuff there. And then yeah, so a year. Would it be about a year? Yeah, it'd be about a year, maybe even less than a year. That then I was, it's like, oh well, there's former Yugoslavia that they're going to, and you've been picked to go over there. And I'm like, all right. So
so you were with that group that left from LAR to set up in Duravar and all that in Croatia, and then in that first roto.
Yes, I got attached to the fourth Combat Engineer Regiment, 4CER. There's a bunch of us cooks attached there, and then over to Daravar, Croatia. We were there for the main camp was in Daravar, and then I got tasked to go with 4-1 Field Squadron, out, like way the hell out. So we were in Vukovar for, I'd like to say 3 months, and we were there. I'm trying to think. Was that Sector East? And then we came back to camp. We were there for 3 or 4 days, and then and then we went down to it's just outside of Sisak, the little town of Sisak, a little town called Petrinia. And we were there for another 2 months, I think, with the field squadron there. So I didn't spend much time in the main camp. I was out and away with the 4-1 squadron. So, and that was March to September of 92. And then came back from that. Of course, while I was gone, they had decided to close the base in LAR. My unit, RCHA, had already repatriated back to Canada. So there was a couple of us that we didn't have a unit to go to. We were still attached to 4CER, and we got our posting messages to be posted back to Canada. So what normally takes 6 months of planning, and you have to get your vehicles ready to go back and all your stuff packed up and then through customs and all your forms and everything else, would normally take 6 months, we had to do in 2. So it was a little bit of hectic times, and basically that's all we were doing was doing our clearances and stuff like that, making sure everything was ready and all that stuff, and just kind of reporting to the unit every morning, going in, yes, I'm here, and then doing what we had to do. So
in order to get everything ready to come back as part of the closure.
Yeah. So
interesting.
I volunteered to stay. Like I went and I said, I'll stay till the end. I'll work over on base or whatever. Like, my unit's already gone back. I don't care. And they said, no, we've already got a posting message for you. We can't really delay it. So I got posted in December. Well, the end of November, beginning of December, to back to Petawawa.
Okay. Were you with just at Petawawa, or were you attached to another unit?
I was attached to 2 service battalion while I was there.
Okay.
For 4.5 years.
Okay. And then I see you went to CFB Kingston following after that.
Yep,
Uh,
posted to Kingston in '97, um, and came down here and been here ever since.
yeah. And your last posting was in Fort Frontenac.
Yeah, down to the well, Land Forces Training, Fort Frontenac. It's where they run the officers courses, is the majors course and the COs course.
Yeah.
So a lot of officers hanging around and going through there, but it was I don't know, it's probably one other than Germany, it was probably one of the most relaxed places to be posted.
It was the last place I traveled to before the lockdown was to Fort Frontenac to observe one of the course serials that went through there and had a very nice meal there. It was fantastic.
Oh
But
yeah,
it was
the kitchen is fantastic. I was IC rations. I was down in the basement, so I don't know
oh,
if they moved the office since then. But my office was the ration office was in the basement.
the basement of
So
Fort Frontenac is a pretty old basement.
yeah, yeah, I had a little office down there. I think I had two little windows, lots of mice to keep me company.
I see. Okay. And then 2005 is when you release. Was that what prompted you to release?
Well, because of we're getting into some, I don't know what you call them, murky area or whatever. So because of, and I went through Veterans Affairs, and this is attributed to my service in the Gulf.
Okay.
So I developed Crohn's disease, and I also developed a degenerative liver disease called primary sclerosing cholangitis. Both of them through Veterans Affairs are attributed to my service in the Gulf. So after I got posted down there, well, before I got posted down there, it started in Petawawa, and I started going to NDMC until they shut it down for medical appointments. They had a Gulf War clinic run there for a little while, and then it became what they call the post-deployment clinic. And then they shut it down, and it kind of got dispersed. But I developed Crohn's and a liver disease, and they discovered the Crohn's when I was at the Gulf War clinic, because you were down there for 2 weeks, and anybody who's in the Gulf War is having medical problems. So they discovered that, and then a little while after that, I was having pains in my stomach, not related to the Crohn's, and I went down to see my GI specialist that was at NDMC, and explained to her what was going on. She was a civilian doctor, and she sent me for another couple tests, and then she says, "No, you've got a liver disease." So she kind of was keeping it low key with her reports back to my medical unit, because with the medications that I was on, she kind of kept it low key, so as not to raise an eyebrow. But I dealt a lot with her, and my medical appointments were all down with her rather than with the base for that. And I'd had a couple episodes. Oh, hang on a sec. Doorbell's ringing. I'll be right back.
Sure. That's no problem. So you were just to resume. So you were talking about some of the challenges you were having through health-wise and how those were being handled at NDMC. And this was during a period, of course, that there were a lot of medical releases taking place. It was a downturn in the economy and savings. Was that? Do you think that factored in to some of the way in which your case was handled?
I don't know. I don't know if it was. What was going on was they had so I was working up on base at the time, and I was going to my appointments in Ottawa, and I was taking medication for my Crohn's. There wasn't a whole lot they could do for my liver, other than just trying to take care of it. But when I got promoted from, I got promoted up on base to Master Corporal. And of course, when you get promoted, you have to do a medical. So I was down at the fort, I was doing my job, and I had to do the promotion medical. And then that's where it got it raised a couple eyebrows because of the medications I was on and what I had, because when they go through the promotion medicals, they get pretty intensive. So, and I wasn't going to lie to them about what was going on. It's just, when they, I did try and keep it low key. My boss knew about what was happening, like my stuff. He didn't know everything, but, and then when I got the medical, it was just like, oh, wow. So it breached the universality of service.
Right.
So once it did that, then you're put on, no promotions, no postings, no career courses, basically. So I was down at the fort, and then shortly after, about 6 months after that, after I got my my medical category, put on category, about 6 months after that, Ottawa came out with this thing about all these, because there was a lot of medical stuff going on at that point in time. And Kingston was kind of known as a base where they stuck all the sick, lame, and lazy people. If you had a medical category or whatever, you go to Kingston because you're not deploying from the base, right? Whereas Petawawa, there's always deployments and there's all the units there. Kingston, really, you only had, the signals regiment, and they had their own cooks and everything else like that. So that was kind of like the mystique that Kingston was. Ottawa came out with this thing that said, if you're on category, then you've got, was it 2 years, I think, to either get off of category or you'd be released medically. So they're trying to get rid of a lot of the medical cases and stuff like that. So I was like, well, I'm sitting here, and one of the guys I was in Germany with, he was at the school in Borden, and because I got promoted to Master Corporal, I was supposed to go on what they call my 6A course. And he phoned me up one day and he says, hey, he says, I was looking at the course list. You're on the next 6A course. And I'm like, James, no, I'm not. I'm on category, man. I'm not going on a course. He goes, no, I just got the list. It came out today. I said, yeah, well, I said, I'm on category. They're not going to put me on that course. And then he's like, well, he says, it just came out. I got your name here. So I'm like, all right, whatever. So a week later, he phoned me back and he says, yeah, I got the new list. You're not on it. I went, I told you. So, and I've been working there for a while, and it's like, I was just kind of, and then I'd had a couple bouts with what I thought were my Crohn's, but actually turned out my liver was acting up, and it knocked me out for, 5-6 weeks. I couldn't do anything. It was just like, it was horrible. So, and then I was downstairs in my office one day, and I went over and the chief clerk that was over there, the sergeant, was one of the corporals who was a clerk over in Bosnia with me in '92. So he actually got sent home early for PTSD. He jumped over the counter to try and strangle an officer. So wow. Not a good situation. But like you say, he had PTSD really bad. Since he'd gone through treatment and stuff like that, he got better. He's promoted, and I spent an hour or so in his office chatting with him about old times and what we were going through and everything else like that. I went back to my office and I came home and I talked to my wife and I said, I think I'm going to release because I'm spinning my wheels. I can't do anything. My condition's not getting any better. It's not going to ever get any better. I'm sitting down there. I can't go anywhere. I can't be posted. I can't be promoted. I was into computers at that time, and one of the chiefs from Ottawa wanted me to get posted to Ottawa to run the new food service program for the help desk because I knew about the computers and the programming and stuff like that. And then when my category came down, that got nixed. And so it was like, I'm sitting here, I can't do anything. I'm I might as well get out. So, and then talking to a couple of the clerks, there's a program where you can get out 6 months early and go back to school, and you're still in the military for that 6 months, but they give you that 6 months to go back to school. Plus, with all the leave that I'd accumulated over the years of basically being on tour and everything else like that and whatnot that I'd saved up for not going anywhere. So I had enough for another 6 months of leave that I had built up. So my last actual working day was like the end of July in 2004. And then I started September 2004, I started St. Lawrence College here in Kingston. And then my actual release date was, I think, August 7th, 2005. So I'd been in school for a year when I actually got released, and then had another 6 months, well, 6-7 months of school. And then after that, but it was kind of nice being paid by the military to go to school for a year.
And what did you go to school for?
I took computer networking and support.
Okay.
Computer networking technical support. So basically doing all like basically computer networking and help desk support and stuff like that. It was a 2-year course. I'd been going to night school ever since I got posted to Kingston. I've been going to night school for computer courses and taking some courses, which is one of the reasons I got posted down to Fort Frontenac. Was working up on base. I set up the POS system, the point of sale swipe card system that we had there, because I've been doing night school courses for basically 4 years, taking different semesters and different stuff and everything. So this is I'm interested in computers. It was kind of a logical thing to get out, even though it had nothing to do with my trade in the military. Mm-hmm. And I guess I was fortunate in that regard, because a year later, a buddy of mine got out, and unless it was related to your trade in the military, they wouldn't send you back to school.
Okay.
So I kind of hit that little sweet spot, I guess, for doing that. So yeah, I got out and took computer networking, and I worked for I got out, and then after I finished school, I got a contract with the Ontario Ministry of Transportation for a year, working at the Kingston office here for a year in their IT support department. And then at that time, they were basically reorganizing the ministries. Mm-hmm. And my contract wasn't extended. So I for 3-4 months, I went around and I went to all the major businesses here, was looking for work and everything else like that, trying to find anything. Nobody wants to hire an old ex-military guy that's, got knee problems and back problems and medical problems, and nobody wanted to do that. So I just basically I joined our local gun club when I got out of the military. Got back into shooting and sport shooting and everything else like that. One of the guys at the club was a site foreman for a local construction company, and I was talking to him one day, and I said, "Yeah, I can't find any work doing this stuff and whatnot." And he says, "Well, I can, he says, I can always use a laborer at my site." I'm like, "All right." So I did construction for 3 years, and did that, and then until so that took me till 2010 or so. The beginning of 2010, and then my liver problems really started to kick up, and I was in Ottawa, and that's when I got put on the transplant list for Ottawa. And then like my liver was going into decline, and was really getting bad. I was sick for quite a while. And and then was it this year will be, so the 30th of May 2011. So this year will be my 10th year anniversary of my liver transplant.
Oh, wow.
At a liver transplant in May 2011.
And were there many complications with that, or did it mainly work?
No complications with the liver. No.
Oh, that's great.
But I haven't worked since then. I've been kind of retired since then. I've done odd jobs here and there for people and stuff like that. But
yeah,
now I'm pretty much retired. I bought when my grandmother passed away. Of course, my grandfather was in the military. So like I say, he'd worked for Jordan Wines, and and it wasn't a whole lot of inheritance there, but we all got a little bit of money. There was 3 grandchildren. My aunt had a daughter, and then there's me and my brother on my mom with my mom. So the 3 of us grandchildren got a little bit of an inheritance, not a whole lot, but a little bit of money. And then the great grandchildren got some. Like I say, my grandparents were very frugal, so my grandfather saved quite a bit of money. And we were just given a little bit, and it's like just to help out and stuff like that, which was great. So because of my retirement, I bought a little bit of I bought a recreational property north of Kingston. So now that's my hunting property. So I go out and I hunt, and I go out during the week, and it's kind of like it's my sane space. I have to go out there to de-stress, and it's it's my happy place. I go out there all the time. So I'm out there 3-4 days a week, even in the wintertime, going out there and just I'm cutting firewood and playing around and cutting trail animals and feeding the deer. And
I know from my own research and reading that getting out in nature is a huge therapeutic element, especially since you had, as you mentioned early on in the interview, that's something you like to do early on. It influenced your decision to go in the armed forces in the first place. That you like to be outdoors and out there, and especially after all the medical tribulations you were through and having to release an account of them when you were a joiner and you volunteered for all these various opportunities. That must have been very tough. So I'm glad that you have a space that you can distress there. It must have been a very hard experience over that decade.
It was. There was a lot of issues going on, and it wasn't until I realized, like one of the big things, and I never realized all my medical problems. It wasn't until, was it 2 years ago, 2.5 years ago, that I didn't realize where all this stuff started from, because I was having medical problems, and my Crohn's and my liver and all the other things going. I mean, knees and back and ankles and shoulder and stuff like that. That's attributed to that's general military stuff. You're with any kind of field unit for any length of time, you're going to have problems, and especially over anything over like 15 years or so, 10-15 years, you will have issues later on. But all the other stuff that was happening to me, my eyesight and everything else like that my liver and my Crohn's, that was like, I know there's some connection there, but what is going on? And it wasn't until, like I say, 2.5 years ago, I was in the hospital for my Crohn's, and my wife brought me up her laptop. So I was using I was in there for over a month, and my wife brought me up her laptop. So I was, on Facebook and all these veterans groups and going through there and stuff like that. And one of the guys was talking about mefloquine poisoning from, especially for the guys in Rwanda and Somalia. And then I realized that we'd been given it before we left to the Gulf, because I went back through my records when I got home. So we were given it for 3 weeks during training before we left to go to the Gulf, because they said we're going to a malaria. And then just before we left, they said, oh no, you don't have to take this anymore. There's no malaria where you're going. Well, we'd already taken the mefloquine.
Right.
It's never been recorded. I know a couple of guys that kept the boxes, and we did take it for 3 weeks. So, and then I started looking at all the stuff that was going on, and I started connecting with some veterans and talking with them about their experiences and what they're doing, and then got in with the advisory group and attended a couple seminars. And all my medical problems seemed to fall into place like a puzzle.
Huh.
It explains everything so well, like everything just fits.
Yeah.
About what's happening. So, and I always thought when I did the Gulf War clinic and afterwards, I went when we were there, and you see when we were at the Gulf War clinic, you're there for 2 weeks and you see everybody. You see a rheumatologist, you see a GI specialist, you see a psychologist, a psychiatrist, anybody that's anything in the medical field, and they do, they do all their tests and stuff, x-rays and scans and everything.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd always said, because I'd always had these bouts of rage, and I always said, okay, it's PTSD from wherever, being in Bosnia, seeing some of the stuff that went on there, because some of the things that were there were just absolutely horrible. We got there while they were still fighting.
Right.
Like they bombed the city we were going. They bombed Darvar like the day before we got there. And to see some of the stuff that had happened, and so it's like, okay, maybe I have PTSD. I don't know. Went through, talked to them, like through the Gulf War clinic, and then afterwards, it's like, okay, I went to Veterans Affairs, and it's like, or the hospital, and said, okay, I got an issue. I need to see, and they, both times I went, no, you don't have PTSD. You don't have PTSD. They said, well, there's something going on. I said, because this isn't normal, and it affected my time with my kids and my wife. And then once I started learning about mefloquine and what was going on and what was happening, that it mimics PTSD, but pretty much all the conditions of PTSD, mefloquine will mimic, except for flashbacks and a couple other little things. And I'd never had any flashbacks. And then, like I say, all this stuff started falling into place. So having the property that I have, and being able to go out there and de-stress and sit, and I sit there and have my lunch, and I got a feeder out for the deer, and I see the deer and the turkeys out there eating, and I get, you see all the animals and stuff like that. It really has kept me sane and kept me going, because I can go out. I know if there's something, if something's going on, it's like, all right, I'm going out the property. I'm gonna, I'll be out there for a few hours. Yeah. And I've stayed out there overnight a couple times, like for hunting season and stuff like that. So, but like I say, it's just a place to go out and get out in the outdoors. There's nobody else there. It's just me and the animals. Mm-hmm. And everybody's, even through this pandemic and stuff like that, really hasn't affected anything, because it's me out there.
Yeah, so, you don't have to you're keeping 6 kilometers away from everyone else, not 6 feet. So what brought you back to the Gulf War? So for 30 years since the war, you're part of the Gulf War Veterans group on Facebook. That's how we got in touch through posting on there. What brought you back to there? Was it some of the ongoing medical issues? Was it just kind of reconnecting with people?
Well, I'm trying to think how many years ago it was. But there was a Gulf War Veterans Association set up by a gentleman named Bob McKinnon years and years and years ago, and he tried to get veterans to connect and stuff like that. But I mean, at that time, we're in our 30s, 40s, maybe some of the older guys are in their 50s, but not much happened. Bob's unfortunately passed away, a number of years ago. But a new guy picked it up, whom you've talked to, Harold Davis. Mm-hmm. So Harold's our president. I'm on the executive. I run the kit shop, and I'm working on the website, doing that for him. He kind of volunteered me into that. But anyway, so I started, reconnecting with some of these guys and stuff like that. And, ever since getting out, I still have my buddies and stuff that it's what I missed about the military, is the guys that I met and hung around with and stuff like that. And, there's a lot of that on Facebook, on the different groups and stuff like that, and the veterans groups. But, and then Harold said, oh, we're going down and we're going to march in the Memorial Day parade down in Washington, D.C. with the Desert Storm veterans. And I thought, yeah, but I mean, the Americans had so many, plus the coalition forces, and then Canada had a really small role. But it's like, you know what? I'd never done anything because, you know, people look at me and go, why aren't you traveling? Why don't you do anything? And it's like, shit, I was doing shit in my 20s that, you know,
Yeah.
you people still haven't done. You know, I was all over the world. I'd been to places. I'd done my adventuring. I want to be home.
Mm-hmm.
And I've always been comfortable with that. My wife, I met her in Germany. She's not German. She's from Cape Breton, by the way, which is, it's an odd story to tell, but so she always wanted to travel and she likes traveling. It's like, so I was talking about this and she goes, well, let's go and do it. And it's like, you know what? I got to kind of break this habit of just like staying here and being by myself. And, you know, although it's nice to get out to the property and stuff like that, and I do that, but I got to do something. So we went down, it was 4 years ago this year in May. So we went down and it's just had the most amazing time with these veterans, with these guys, these Desert Storm vets, and met some awesome people. And it's like, man, this is fantastic, you know? And so, and then 3 years ago was like our second, you know, we're going down again. So we were at a different hotel in a different place. But, you know, we went down basically for a week from a Wednesday to a Wednesday. So we had all this time down there, and there's a bunch of us, 3 couples, and then a couple other people that were a couple other single people that were there, Canadians. So we kind of, we did hang around together, but we hung around with the Americans as well. But we get to go to the Smithsonian, and, you know, the first year we were there, we had a tour of the White House.
Wow.
Second year we were there, we had a tour of the Senate.
Mm-hmm.
And that, of course, we couldn't go last year because of what's going on. They canceled it for this year again. So, but we got into that and started doing that. And it's like, you know, this has been, like you say, met some really good people. So there's veterans on that I connect with Facebook on now, and we phone call every once in a while. Some of these, you know, a couple Air Force guys. I got one Marine veteran, a couple Army guys that we've talked to that, you know, we're friends with and stuff. And it's just kind of like going to see these guys. So is like, you know, in Bosnia in 92, that, you know, that group was all right, you know, it was, you know, and then when I was back again in 96, but, you know, the Gulf War is kind of like a, you know, UNPROFOR went on for so long, right? The Gulf War was there for only a short period of time. And it's kind of like it's a point in history more so than anything else. So it's kind of, and then with the 30th anniversary, and then a year ago, before all this pandemic stuff started, and I didn't really, I didn't really connect to it too much because, you know, we were in Qatar. We didn't get into Kuwait. We didn't see what was going on. We were a fair ways away. Last February, the Kuwaiti ambassador to Canada, she wanted to do a dinner to thank all the Gulf War veterans for the Canadian veterans for what they did. She was just a young girl at the time, so she lived through that period of time. And so there was a luncheon in Ottawa the one day, and then the next day was like a big get together at the Chateau Laurier Hotel for the veterans and their wives. And then it was basically like the Freedom of Kuwait days. So they had a whole bunch of, like, all the Kuwaiti citizens who were in Ottawa and Canada could come to this, and we got invited with our wives, but the luncheon was just strictly for the veterans. And they presented us with a scroll and this very nice pewter dish. I don't know if anybody showed it to you.
Yes.
Yeah. So we got that, and it was like in this beautiful presentation box. And then probably the best part about that was listening to her story about what happened from her perspective during the Gulf, because, like I say, you know, maybe the guys in, like, some of the guys that were there that actually went into Kuwait afterwards, like Sammy Sampson and a couple of those other guys that had seen that, but we were in Qatar, we never saw that.
Right.
So listening to her account is kind of like, you know what? We actually did some good. We actually did what we were supposed to do and, you know, help these people. Whereas, you know, you go to, you know, Bosnia and UNPROFOR, well, they're still fighting and all this stuff's going on. And, you know, it's, it doesn't really seem like we did much over there other than just kind of prolong,
Hmm.
you know.
Yeah.
So it was actually like hearing that, and it's like, okay, wow, we actually did help these people and did what we were supposed to do, and the world's a better place for it.
Mhm.
So that's kind of why that resonates more than anything else for me. I mean, Bosnia was different because it was I actually saw war from the down on the ground perspective and what was going on, and things that were there. And, you know, the town of Vukovar, when we moved in, was totally like, there wasn't a building left that wasn't blown up to some degree. Like what the Serbs didn't blow up trying to take it, the Croatians blew up as they left so the Serbs couldn't use it, type of deal. Um, and seeing that complete and utter destruction and stuff like that. But, you know, after we left, it kind of went back to what it was before.
Yeah.
Really. So, but, you know, Kuwait, you know, the Gulf War has actually made a difference for people in a tangible way. So that's probably why I keep going back to that, because it's just, you know,
Yeah.
it's just, it just feels like we actually accomplished something and actually did something good.
Well, I mean, thank you very much for taking me back to with you to some of the experiences today. I don't have many other questions for you at this time. Is there anything that you'd like to talk through or revisit or?
No, I don't know. Not really. It's, you know, unless you have anything specific, you know, there's not really, I mean, yeah, like any veteran, I can sit and talk for hours and, you know, but, um, you know, unless you have anything specific. And I mean, if you come up with something, if you have some questions later on, please feel free to give me a call back, because,
Okay.
you know, I don't mind. Like you say, this is, like I say, it's something that resonates with me because we actually did something. So I don't mind talking about doing stuff like that. I mean, I'll even, you know, talk about, you know, this, not what this is for, but you know, my stuff in Bosnia and what we did in UNPROFOR in 92. And then when I went back with I4 in 96,
Mm-hmm.
but, you know,
Well, this has been a very interesting interview with Master Corporal Retired Richard Delve in Kingston, Ontario. I'm in Ottawa, Ontario, on 29th March 2021. Interview ends. Thank you so much for joining us today.
well, thank you for having me. It was great to talk to you.
And we may be back in touch to talk about Bosnia, so stay tuned. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Uh,